So I was watching my Star Wars podcasts as I do every day usually. I'm a big fan of Steel Wars. I think he has such a positive outlook on Star Wars, which is really refreshing because we're so at each other's throats all the time. So it's great to see him always in a good mood and always positive about it. I love that. So I watch him a lot. I don't know how recent this episode was, but he was talking to the guy who did the Phantom Edit, which is like it's the thing that started fan edits. And it's not, I mean, Star Wars is the biggest one because it's the one that started it, and I mean, for better or worse, Star Wars has the most passionate fan base out there. I've seen some DC films get like edited, and Topher Grace, I believe he did like a 3-hour thing. It was like all 3 prequels condensed into like a 3-hour long movie. So like this has been around, but the guy who did the original Phantom Edit was on Steel Wars, and he was talking about it. He seemed like a very, very intelligent, very nice, very down-to-earth guy. But I did notice he did say one thing, and I was kind of like, wow, that's interesting, where he said that when he did his Phantom Edit of the Attack of the Clones, he said he strategically sent that copies of that edit to people he knew were close or friendly with George Lucas as a way to kind of like get George Lucas to see the movie and his version of the movie. And I just kind of listened to that and I thought, dude, George Lucas doesn't care about your edit. He doesn't want to watch your movie. He doesn't want to watch your version of his movie. Because essentially what you've done is said, here, George Lucas, I took out all the bad stuff. I mean, there is no bad stuff to George Lucas. Everything that he put in that movie, that's his art. He filled it with everything that he loved and everything that he thought was good and everything that he thought was quality. The guts on some of these people that they think like, oh, if I'll tell George Lucas what's good. Let me explain it to you, George. Let's get something clear. George Lucas, there is no individual in the last 100 years of cinema that is more influential than George Lucas. There isn't like a second best. George Lucas, I mean, nobody has made a bigger influence on American culture, on Western civilization in terms of our pop culture and how we entertain ourselves. And and it's not just about Star Wars. I mean, if you go look up all the things that George Lucas had influence on, all the things that flowed from George Lucas, it's like there will never be another George Lucas. George Lucas he's smarter than you. He's smarter than me. He's the smartest guy in any room that he walks into. So let's make that clear out of the way. You're not smarter than George Lucas, internet. It was an interesting conversation. It was especially interesting to see where because this guy went into in detail why he thinks the Phantom Menace is bad, and it was interesting to listen to because I don't share that. This is a bit of a rant, and you'll see me one of these days get on to explain what I love about the Phantom Menace, because there's a lot about that movie that I love. It was interesting to hear a different point of view, from the guy who started this fan edit culture, and not just in Star Wars. It's like pop culture, like in general. Any passionate fan base, if there's something out there that they don't like, you're gonna see a fan edit out there. And this is the guy that started that. So it was really interesting to hear him talk. And when he said that, he's like, I sent it to George Lucas to just kind of trying to get him to see the movie. It's like, he doesn't want to watch your version of his movie. I've been thinking about this all day, and I really don't like fan edits. I don't like them. I have zero interest in watching any of them. George Lucas is this experimental filmmaker, right? That's what George is. These films are crazy and weird and unique and never before seen. And it's just infused with all these crazy ideas that George Lucas has. Guys, the prequels are fascinating movies because there are no other movies out there like them. They are, 3 of a kind, or really 1 of a kind, because each one of those movies is so drastically different from the other ones. I have no interest. It's in fan edits, because it's essentially someone going in and trying to take out all the uniqueness in those films in an attempt to essentially make them more like every other movie that's ever been made. And that's why I don't like them. That's why I have zero interest. I've never sat down and watched more than a couple minutes of a fan edit, because it's just like, the great thing about Star Wars, all 6 of George's original films are, those were, George Lucas beat the system. He did the impossible. He's the ultimate independent filmmaker. People don't realize that episodes 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 are independent movies. George made those movies outside of the studio system. He paid for them himself. He's the ultimate, artist. He's the ultimate independent filmmaker. George Lucas didn't answer to anybody. He was able to make the prequels so weird and so crazy and whatever he wanted, because the only person he had to answer to was himself. So he did whatever the hell he wanted to do, and I love that. When people talk badly about the prequels, which is, most of the internet, I always hear this certain thing continuously being brought up over and over again, and it's that George didn't follow the rules. George Lucas doesn't understand basic screenwriting 101. George Lucas doesn't understand basic movie making. George Lucas doesn't understand the rules of how you make a movie and how you don't. And it's like, guys, I don't think we're understanding what's going on here. Again, the Star Wars under George Lucas, these are not conventional movies. These are experiments. George Lucas has always been an experimental filmmaker. And it's in the name. Experimental. Meaning he's doing something that's never been done before. Experimenting on something that's not proven. Thinking in a way that nobody else is thinking. The rules of filmmaking, I think that's hilarious, because it's like essentially like what they're talking about is like, what you learn at like film school. And not to like knock film school and like to stick your nose up at like, oh, you don't need film school. Like, I'm not trying to do that. Essentially what they're teaching you is how other people have already made movies. How all the ways that movies have already been made. George Lucas isn't interested in making movies the way that other people have made movies. He's interested in making movies in a way that nobody has made before. And that's kind of like, that's the beauty of it. That's what's like most fun about those movies, is that there's nothing like them. But George Lucas knows how to make movies, guys. He knows how to make movies. He knows all that stuff. He knows the rules. He went to film school. Here's the thing, though. He's purposely not following those rules, because those rules are a guideline and a pathway to walk down a path of movie making that is walked by every other filmmaker every day of the week in every century in every movie that's ever been made. And he's not interested in doing that. He's not doing these things by accident. He's not like accidentally like, oops, I didn't realize that this wouldn't work. He's doing things that's never been done before. He's not interested in making a movie the ways that movies have always been made. He's interested in making movies in ways that no one had ever thought. Dave Filoni has said this about George Lucas, is that he mentioned how George Lucas, sometimes with George Lucas on Clone Wars, would come in and he would say, okay, this is what we're doing, guys. This is the new idea for the new episode. And everyone would look at George Lucas and go, okay, George. And then George would leave the room, and then they would go look at each other like, what's going on here? What is he thinking? This is a bad idea. And it would seem that way. And then they would make the episode, and then it would be finished, and they sit back and watch it and be like, oh, I see what's just happened. The natural human reaction when you hear something for the first time, when you hear an idea, a new idea that you've never heard anywhere else, your natural reaction is to sit back and go, oh, that's a bad idea. And the reason you had that reaction is because you've never heard an idea like that before. There's nothing to compare it to. So, if you haven't experienced it already, obviously it must not be very good. And that's George Lucas in a nutshell. That's George Lucas in his Star Wars films and everything Star Wars that George ever worked on, or really just any movie George ever worked on. Most of them, like in the prequels, especially at first glance, are like, oh, what is that? Oh. The prequels are like, I always describe it like it's like trying to read a book in a foreign language. If you don't know the language that it's written in, if you don't know that foreign language, you're going to look at the book, not understand it, put it down, and then go back to familiar things. But if you take time to learn the language it's written in, if you take time to learn the visual language of George Lucas and understand what experiments he's running with this experimental crazy movie that he's making, then all of a sudden you sit back and you realize, oh my God, look at this. It's incredible. To me, that's George Lucas. That's George Lucas. That's his prequels. They're fascinating. They're fascinating movies. And I do think that they are great. Some of them are among some of the great movies ever made. That might sound crazy to some people, but I believe it. I really do. I look at these movies and I just see just so much that you're never going to see anything like these ever again. I love those movies. So anyway, in the Steel Wars interview, the Phantom Edit guy, the Phantom editor, his name's Mike something. I can't remember his name. He didn't want his name to be known anyway, so I don't feel bad about not looking it up before doing this. He looked at it in the way of like, why, you know, I'm trying to re-edit and re-shift this film around to align more with the philosophy of George Lucas. And he kept mentioning how, like, George, the reason the prequels are bad is because George Lucas he's breaking his own rules. I kind of look at that and I go, well, not really. He's just playing by new ones. The Phantom Edit is an attempt to make the prequels more like the originals. It's trying to make these newer Star Wars movies feel and act like these older ones. And the whole idea is behind the prequels is that George Lucas never repeated himself. He wasn't trying to make the originals over again. He already did that. Now it's time to try something totally new. Everything about the prequels, a lot of it is like, I mean, like, we all know the famous poetry line from George Lucas. We all know that line by heart.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
So there obviously are major similarities, but there are so many other things about the prequels that are like the complete opposite. Like, he switched it, like turned it on its head. Like, this is the polar opposite of what we were doing before. And that was done on purpose. That wasn't like George Lucas forgetting how to do Star Wars. That was George Lucas going, okay, now it's time to do something new with Star Wars. And we all hated it. I always think it's hilarious when I hear people bring up the fact that, well, George Lucas was clearly a businessman first. All he wanted to do was make toys. And that's why the prequels are bad. Because they're just filled with George Lucas with opportunities to make toys and blah, blah, blah. And he's just a businessman before a filmmaker, and all he cares about is money. I think that's hilarious. I think that's a hilarious point of view. And again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. The great thing about any type of creative art like filmmaking is that all of it's objective. This isn't math class. There is no like right or wrong answer. Everybody's right and nobody's wrong. That being said, I do think that notion that George Lucas is a businessman only, and that George, like, I hear people all the time that George Lucas was like this rebel against the studio system, and then George Lucas all of a sudden switched and now he became the thing that he hated, where he became like this evil, you know, studio guy and made these movies that nobody liked. No, that's not what happened at all, because Phantom Menace, that movie got such a negative, harshly, violently negative reaction. Yeah, it made all the money. Yeah, it was like the second highest grossing movie of all time when it came out. Second to only like Titanic. Yeah, that all that is true. You're absolutely right. But critically and more importantly, the fan opinion of your movie is that we hate everything about this and we hate you for making it. So if George Lucas is like this evil businessman who only cares about money and making money off of toys, and he's this evil studio guy, after the Phantom Menace, you go and make The Force Awakens, which is exactly what the fans are asking for, which is exactly what people want. And I love The Force Awakens. I think The Force Awakens is great. I think Force Awakens is like the hardest movie in the history of movies to hate, because it is like, it's just a big love letter to Star Wars. But instead of doing that, instead of making The Force Awakens, instead of giving people exactly what they were asking for, instead of doing that, he continued to make 2 more weird, crazy, polarizing movies. Don't tell me George Lucas is like this evil studio guy. He's not. He's not at all. I mean, this is like, he's the farthest thing from it. I mean, George Lucas uncompromisingly told these stories exactly the way that he wanted to tell them. And he didn't care. He didn't care that you hated Phantom Menace. He's going to go and make the next movie even weirder. And he did. Attack of the Clones is like one of the weirdest movies you'll ever see. Ever. Star Wars did go to a studio system. Disney owns Star Wars. I know we all love Disney, but let's not forget that, you know, Disney is about the money first. They're in the business of making money. You know, before they get to make that movie magic, they need to make sure that movie magic is going to come with some cold hard cash and, like, you know, a dump trucks of it. The Force Awakens, I mean, I use that as an example, not only because it's a perfect example, but because that's exactly what happened when Star Wars came back to a studio system. People hated the prequels, so they went and they made The Force Awakens, which was just like I said, a giant love letter to the original trilogy. To circle back, like Phantom edits, I don't care about them and I don't like them because it's passionate fans going and taking these bold, crazy, experimental, one-of-a-kind movies and trying to make them like every other movie that's ever been made. That's how I feel about them. Look, we all share the same passion and all this stuff, and when we all share in this love of these crazy space movies. Star Wars is so much more than just lightsabers and spaceships and lasers and costumes and aliens, and it's so much more than that. Like honestly, lightsabers and spaceships, that's like my least favorite part of Star Wars. That stuff is just like the cherry on top. It's the sprinkles on top. It's not, the thing that I love about Star Wars is it's the stories. It's the themes, it's the messages. It's the characters that these stories are being told through. That's what I love about this franchise. And that's what I love about these stories that, all started with one guy just making his art. All 6 of George's films, that was George Lucas making his art. And it's fascinating to go back and just look at the bigger picture, or even the individual pictures of what he was trying to do. And in my opinion, what he succeeded in doing in most cases. If you don't like the prequels, that's totally fine. You don't have to love them. Like I said, no, everybody's right and nobody's wrong. That's the best part about, if you love any kind of art, whether it's a film or a book or a painting or a comic or a video game, whatever. You can love whatever you want as much as you want to love it. There's no right answer. It's not a math equation. There's no decimal points here. And this is something that I think the Star Wars fandom and needs to learn in general, is like, if you hate something, you have every right to you love this thing, you're passionate about this thing, you have every right to get on YouTube in front of a camera and talk into a microphone and say, I didn't like this and this is why I didn't like it and this and this, in like a civilized way. You have every right to do that. And quite honestly, if we all agreed, it would not be nearly as fun to talk about all this stuff as it is. When you don't like something, after you're done saying what you don't like about it, move on. And not even like move on from Star Wars. I mean, like, move on back to the stuff that you do love. One of the great things about Disney Star Wars is that, listen, this is a never-ending flow of new movies and new, not just movies anymore, now all kinds of content, where it's like, if you didn't like one thing, if you hated The Last Jedi, I'm sorry you hated it, and that's super disappointing for you. But guess what? Episode 9 is only a couple months away. And then after if you hated Episode 9, guess what? There's 2 more trilogies in the works. And that's just the movies that we know about. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we have no idea that they're working on, that it's going to be incredible stuff. Everyone just needs to, everybody cool down. It's going to be okay. And just go back to talking about the things that you love. Don't dwell on the things that you hate, because that's not healthy, and it's also not fun. Leave the prequels alone. If you love them like me, that's awesome. Come join my little corner of the internet, and we're going to sit here and analyze and talk about them forever. They're probably the 3 most interesting movies that have ever been made. And if you hate them, don't try to change them. Leave them be. And go back to the stuff that you like. Over here, right up there, there's a lovely movie called The Force Awakens. The poster's right there. If you hate the prequels and you love the originals, that movie is a love letter to you in those movies. And if you hate that movie because it's too similar, there's another movie. Especially if you love Star Wars for, Darth Vader doing awesome things and X-Wings and, cool action space explosions. It's called Rogue One. It's my least favorite Star Wars movie. For me, it rings hollow, and it's missing so much of what I love about these movies. I love to see how people rank Star Wars. I think it's fascinating to see where all these movies land, and I'll do that myself someday because it's just fun. It's fun to see like how people interpret these, because one of the things that's so great about this franchise is that it's so different each and every single movie. And this is mostly thanks to George Lucas, because again, he tried so hard to make these movies so different from one another every single time he tried to make one. I mean, Rogue One, I see that all the time, people putting that one at number 2, which blows my mind because it's at the bottom of my list, but people love that movie, and that's totally fine. Good for you. I'm glad. Like, and that's another thing I don't understand too. People who like, I hate the prequels and we should erase them. I'm not one to call other people stupid, but that stupid petition that went all across the internet that we have to strike Last Jedi from the canon. What? You gotta remake the movie. It's like, oh god. That's the thing where it's like, guys, if you hated it, that's okay. But know that there is a ton of people out there who loved it. And that movie means something to people. That movie means something to me. The last thing I would ever want to do is to wish any of that to just like disappear. Just because I don't necessarily like Rogue One very, very much, and there's things about it that I don't like at all, but I would never wish that movie, sign a petition or ever say that I wish that movie didn't exist, because there's so many people who love it and that movie means something to them. So who am I to sit here and go, you're wrong for having an emotional connection with this movie that, by the way, thousands of people poured their passion into. And I would never just sit here and say you're wrong for liking it, because you're not. Anyway, that's my thing. That's my rant. I don't know. It's just that was just on my mind today. I don't like fan edits. And we should all let's just all be nice to each other for a change, huh? Let's just kind of, I don't know. Everyone cool it. Everyone, can we just like all hold hands and sing a nice Life Day song together, and nobody try to digitally murder each other for about 5 seconds. Just 5 seconds. Just give us 5 seconds.
We celebrate a day of peace, a day of harmony.
There's my spiel. Thanks for listening, everyone. Let me know down below if you agree or disagree with anything that I just said. I'd love to hear it. Maybe be civilized, though. Maybe. I mean, here's a challenge. If you think I'm wrong or you disagree with any or all of what I've just said, let me know in the comments below, but do it without calling me stupid, dumb, or saying that you hate me. That is all. Thank you.
How? How did they do that?